So you have the state of the African American male coming up. Who came up with the idea?
You know, we actually came up with the idea about maybe 12, 13 years ago. And it was Richard Boykin who first approached me with doing a state of the African American male when he was working for me as my chief of staff. And we did, when we came up with it, we kicked off in D.C. We had people like Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee there, and Minister Farrakhan. Then we did Chicago, and I remember our keynoter was pastor out at Rock of Ages Church, Reverend Marvin Wiley. And we had but we went to Houston with Sheila Jackson Lee. We went to Oakland with Barbara Lee. We went to Los Angeles. We went to New York with Gregory Meeks. We went to Miami with the other Meeks, and we did Memphis. So we did about 10 different cities using the same approach, the same model that we're going to be using for this conference on September 8th and 9th. And the idea just kept moving, because when we look at stats, when we look at the sociology of being black, when we look at the pathology of being black, when we look at the indicators of social well-being, black boys and men are at the bottom or the top when you measure things. Highest dropouts from school, black boys. Earliest death, black men. Highest unemployment, black young men. Highest incarceration rate, black men. So almost anything negative that you can think of relative to social indicators of quality of life, black men lead the field. And we look at that and try and figure out what can we do and how can we do it to change the trajectory. Much of it also is determined by how we know what got us here. I mean, there is a reason, for example, that black boys drop out of school more than other boys. And I maintain that one of the reasons is that when black boys in many communities go to school, they never see a male teacher when they're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and they definitely do not see a black man reading books and reading newspapers and just doing those things that would develop an interest in education. I come to that conclusion based upon my own experiences in terms of how I grew and developed as a person. My daddy had a fourth grade education, but he was a great reader. I mean, he read everything that he could get his hands on. I developed a trait of reading when I was a little boy, and I read everything I could get my hands on. It didn't matter what it was. I would actually read his Masonic books, I mean, that you weren't supposed to have. I knew where he kept them hidden. I read the Bible. I read anything. I mean, and some of the books that I would run into, I would read them over and over and over because I didn't have another book. And I can remember many of those autobiographies. That's what was available. And so I maintain that if we teach young people to read and a love for reading, a desire to read, that reading will propel them in any direction that they want to go. That they, and even in this highly technological age, if individuals don't learn the fundamentals of reading and writing and arithmetic, they can't really do technology. They can do some things, but they won't be able to do what one would expect them to be able to do. And so reading to me is fundamental. It's necessary. It connects you with the rest of the world that you may not be able to experience. And then you couple that with the high rate of single parenthood that we experience in African American life, where it becomes a struggle for just thousands and thousands and thousands of families to eke out a living. And so children grow up struggling for almost anything that it is that they need to have or that they want. And it becomes so prevalent that even when children live in a certain kind of environment and their home life may be different, the environment has a tendency to have as much impact and sometimes even more on them. So we come up with this idea of spending a day and a half looking at the African American male, what has gotten us to where we are, but more importantly, what can take us beyond. I mean, some of the things we'll never be able to recapture. For example, when I was growing up in my era, African Americans were strong on telling their children that they had to be a certain way and that you got to be better than other members of society in order to be successful. Well, many people took that to heart and they kind of did it and they thrived on it and they did all right. Of course, some did not. But because of the change in conditions in terms of racism not being as profound and as pronounced as it was at that time, I sometimes think that we get to the basement and act like we're in the penthouse. I'm saying the basement, and we think that we've risen much further than we have. And so some of those things that need to happen in terms of discipline, certain kinds of teaching, certain kinds of edging on, and constantly saying to children, yes, you can. You may live in what's called the ghetto, but the ghetto doesn't have to live in you.
Who are some of the people that you've recruited to participate for this special event and program?
Well, we have a number of outstanding people, as a matter of fact. People like Phil Jackson, who's a tremendous role model in terms of education. But the dignitary types, we invite all of them. I'm saying the heads of this, the heads of that. We've met with Frank Clark, who is the chairman of the Chicago Public Schools. We've met with Dr. Janice Jackson, who is the chief education officer. We've talked with university presidents and outstanding educators who run alternative schools. Gladys Simpson, as a matter of fact, the lady who runs one of the oldest alternative schools in Chicago and is a part of a network. we've talked with people like Melody Span Cooper, who has been very gracious in terms of making use of her leadership at WVON to help promote and project. We have people like Dawn Dew, who's an outstanding sociologist. We have ministers like Johnny Miller, people like Conrad Worrell, people like Dr. Carl Bell, and grassroots activists also who have not necessarily reached those kind of heights in terms of acknowledgement of their work, but people who on a daily basis, for example, the University of Illinois at Chicago is partnering with us, and Dr. Rex Tolliver, who is the African American Vice Chancellor at the of Student Affairs at the university, has been working with us on a regular, ongoing basis. And of course, a woman named Annetta Wilson, who's the executive director of Sankofa Safe Child Initiative, Dr. David Sanders, who is the president of Malcolm X College, and Thomas Todd. Thomas Nathaniel Todd will be one of our keynotes. Dr. William Bell, who is the head of the Casey Family Programs, will also be one of our keynotes. And we have people like Benny Lee, who's a local guy who rose from being a gang leader to becoming a college professor. And so we've gone across Alan Edwards. We've cut across